Well, it is 10:30. Let us call this Water Policy Committee meeting to order on November 20th, 2024. And Councilmember Bergan, good morning.
Good morning.
Doesn't look like we have Councilmember Hancock, but we have a quorum. Any changes to the minutes?
None for me, thank you.
Minutes are approved. Anything we want to pull from consent items?
The water, please.
The water, I'm sorry, which
Supply, the water supply, sorry, 2B.
water supply 2B, we will pull that for discussion. John Murphy.
Yes, whether specific questions or would you?
Yeah, I'll just, November obviously is not indicated on it, right? Because we just had all that snow.
Yes, I was thinking about that as I was putting it together. We try to capture the most recent month that we can. This backup has to be in so early, I can't get the November stuff on there. But right after October, we had those big snowstorms. So I was prepared for you. We have snowpack now, which we didn't have when I put this report together for the end of October. It's really early. It may not mean much at this time of year, but for what it's worth, we are well over average for all basins for our snow-tail sites. So particularly in the South Platte Basin, if you look at the total basin on the state website, on the snow-tail site, it's only kind of at like 98%. But fortunately, the storms that we had were more south, so they hit our areas better. So we're at about 115, 120%, depending on what you're looking at, of snowpack for this time of year.
Awesome.
And have we flown that plane zigzag and to map it out yet?
So, not yet. We're working on it. Yeah.
Okay,
It is still really early in the season. It's under number.
is that right?
The percentage is also getting a little skewed because traditionally we wouldn't have that much snow in November on the ground. So if we get a large snowfall, it looks like, especially in the percentage base, it's a huge amount. But that's because it's a huge amount versus the median for this year, this time of year, when we don't have that much on the ground. So.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yes.
So you said the plane would first do a baseline indication, and then that later at the end, towards the end of the season, then it measures it again. Is that right?
Yes.
So now that we had significant snowfall early, will it skew the baseline?
I don't think so. I'm just contemplating that because the baseline is when there's no snow.
Right.
Terrain.
So we're already
okay.
I think
Oh,
so.
so when they do it, it probably won't have the amount.
Look at that.
Yeah,
That's a great
it's a
question.
great question.
Glad you think about those things, frankly.
I'm wondering if that baseline has not already been established, not this year, but in prior years when there is no snow.
Oh, maybe.
Mhm. But yeah, we'll look into that. That is a great question. Obviously, you hadn't contemplated it.
Any other questions?
Happy to oblige with my questions.
Any further water supply questions?
No.
Okay, we're off to a good start then. Excellent. Moving on then to item 3, consideration to appoint one member to Metro Water Recovery District Board, Marshall Brown.
Yeah, so we have had some long tenured people on the Metro board historically. When I think it was Dan Meisel left, we shifted Greg Baker into that role, knowing Greg would be a little shorter term. But Greg had been here a long time, had a lot of experience and knowledge, etc. So Greg, I think everybody is aware, is planning to retire.
And that will affect the budget positively too.
Hugely, yeah.
Just, yes, he's gonna, all the speeding he does down this road.
That'll have a negative impact on cash. Yes, okay.
So, Greg, I actually signed his, they, even though you retire, they call it termination paperwork a couple of days ago. So paperwork is now processed. I reluctantly signed that, which will allow Greg to retire in December of this year. So this is Greg's last water policy meeting, so that everybody's aware. After, and Greg was here when I came 12 years ago. He'd been here 15,
16 years.
16 years now. So he was fantastic in helping me get up to speed on a number of different things. He's a wealth of knowledge, and we're going to miss Greg. So he is also not continuing with his Metro Board representation. We, for the Metro Board, we like to have a balance. We have 6 seats now. That increased a couple of years ago because of our population. So we have 3 ex-council members who serve on the board, and then we've had 3 active staff members serve on the board as kind of the balance we've striven for. And Greg retiring leaves a void for one of the staff members. So the appointments are staggered also. So we've got right now Bob Roth expiring in 2026, and we'll discuss that reappointment at that time. Bob Laguerre also expiring in 2026. And in 2025, we have Nadine Caldwell and Marina Lurch. And James D. Herrera is also expiring in 2026. He's another staff member. So Greg, what we're proposing is that Kat, right here, would complete his existing term through the end of 2025. And then, so she'll serve 1 year instead of the standard 2-year, and then she would be on that 2025 cycle. We like to stagger the cycles.
Okay.
So it's essentially replacing Greg with Kat.
Gotcha.
And that's a council appointment. So that's our recommendation that we will take to council unless there's questions, or Kat, I think, is excited, so she can't object, but if anyone else has any other questions, just kidding.
Thanks for stepping in, Kat.
Happy to do it.
Well, that moves forward then, it sounds like. Any opposition? Okay, great. And item 4, Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission lease extension IGA, Richard.
Rick has a small PowerPoint he's gonna
Okay.
provide.
Yeah, I've got a small PowerPoint I'll share here. This is in conjunction, this lease, CPW lease is in conjunction with Aurora's recent farm purchase in the Arkansas Basin. We're down here in Rocky Ford. The circle there indicates where this lease and access agreement will take place. Just a little bit of background. Most of you all know the 2024 purchase this year of the Aurora, Arkansas farm was due largely in part with the difficulty of how water is to acquire in the South Platte and the Colorado basins, and this was developing the last, or the legal part of Aurora's available water in the Arkansas basin. And legally, under our IGAs and agreements, we can develop additional water for interruptible supply. So the purpose is to move this water 3 and 10. And then it is also to continue to farm this ground 7 out of 10. And so that's how this water will help. It will help in the 7 out of 10 years when it's still farming. The Aurora, Arkansas Farms is water short, so there's more land than there are shares. And by continuing to use this water, and this is a lease that was acquired or was taken over by Aurora from the previous owner, and so by continuing to use this water, we will continue to strengthen the historical consumptive use and be able to move more water in those interruptible supply years. This is the farm, just to give you a reminder of where that farm is and how it follows the river and also follow the Arkansas River and follows the canals there, the dark red. The next picture is the hatched marks are the lease access, which is also a part, the public access, which is also a part of this agreement. Just the dynamics of this, 875, that says 50, but it's 875 shares of Catlin Water, $47,600. There is an public access discount for those hatched areas, which is $16,053. So the total cost of the lease agreement is $31,547. That's for quite a bit of water, 850 shares. And because it's ag water, not just HCU, it's over 2 shares, 2 acre feet per share that can be put on this ground. The thing to remember here is the cost of this lease, that $31,547, is something that will be passed along to the SRF Farms, which is the Swink Rocky Ford Farms. That is Aurora's farming partner that farms this land 7 out of 10 years. So just conclusions. The total cost of the lease is $31,547. The cost will be passed on to the Swink Rocky Ford Farms through the farming lease. By continuing this lease, we will improve the historical consumptive use, and that strengthens and could improve the amount of water that we can move in those interruptible supply years. And just asking for support in moving this item forward.
Questions from anyone?
I'm good.
All right. Oh, and good morning, Mayor. We need to acknowledge the mayor. Good morning, sir. All right. Seeing no questions on item 4, that moves forward. Thank you. Thanks, Rick.
Thank you.
Moving on to item 5, Sampson Robinson Gulch Regional Pond IGA Amendment, Sam.
Yes, good morning. Let me just pull up my small presentation. Maybe? Yeah. Good morning, everybody. This IGA from Mile High Flood District is an amendment, so hopefully this rings at least a little bit of a bell. And you would have seen it earlier this year in August, actually, for the first part of this project. So the Sampson and Robinson Gulch have a confluence at that location highlighted in yellow. And right where they both meet, there is a pond. It was built 24 years ago without consideration for safe and accessible maintenance access. You can kind of see from some of the aerial photos that we've got some sedimentation, and from the street view photo that the water gets quite high and it doesn't quite move where we need it to go. It's difficult for our operations team to get in there and clean any of that out and fix it. So this project would have a large overhaul of all of the sediment and reconstruct the outlet so that it is easier to maintain in the future. The first agreement you saw earlier this year allowed for the design funds to be allocated to this project. Some of those were maintenance funds that were reallocated to a capital project when the scope of this kind of expanded past what the maintenance project could allow. And this IGA, this First Amendment and only amendment, will bring the project to be fully funded for construction early next year.
Okay.
And I am asking if this Water Policy Committee supports moving this item to regular council. I am sorry about that. I mistyped.
That pond looks like a breeding ground for West Nile virus to me. Any
That your
questions?
approval?
Any questions?
I had just one. You mentioned it was built 24 years ago and it wasn't built appropriately to get rid of the high water that occurs. Who was that, a developer that built that?
No, I don't believe so. I think just the amount of sediment that came through and the type of access that we needed 24 years ago has changed to what we do now. And so whatever is there is no longer compatible with how we operate and is
Okay.
causing.
So just, any future ones that we have built or others build and that we don't anticipate, future problems, would that would always, I guess, be mitigated by the city and Mile High Flood District?
Yeah, so there is a good chance it was built by the original developer to the
Standards.
time. Yeah, stormwater standards have probably more than any of the other two utilities have evolved and changed quite a bit over the last recent decades. So our design standards and criteria are different now than they were 25 years ago. So if or when ponds are built today to meet these same types of needs, they're built to a different standard than we had 25 years ago.
Right, but if the standard changes again, let's say in
Yes.
10 years.
The ponds, the ownership, the developers on the regional ponds don't maintain ownership. So there's two different types of ponds out there. Well, two different general categories of ownership for the stormwater ponds. There are a lot of private ponds that I think we have like 600 of those scattered throughout the city that are still owned and maintained by HOAs or more commonly probably metro districts. But the regional ponds, when they're created, often again built by developers, those would be conveyed to public entities for ownership and maintenance, which would be either the city of Aurora, we own a bunch, or Metro. When Metro maintains them, do we own those or
What are you
does
talking about?
Metro?
Mile High.
Sorry, Mile High.
It's-
Mile High Flood Control District, not Metro.
Yeah, but it's typically us, so either the city, and lately there are a couple of instances where we have allowed metro districts to operate and maintain regional ponds if they adhere to a certain I&M agreement. So exactly to your point, they were requiring those maintenance commitments ahead for each of those different types of ponds and the ownership of them.
Which is another thing that's evolved quite a bit from, say, a couple of decades ago, is we didn't have those types of agreements in place for maintenance or make the maintenance criteria clear. So we've learned a lot since we started in the stormwater business.
Yeah, I would imagine a developer would not want to maintain them into perpetuity because as standards change, I mean, if I was a developer, I wouldn't want to be on the hook for something that I can't even predict a cost for. Yeah.
It kind of depends. It's a little bit fascinating. Some of the developers want the responsibility because they want to do some unique things with that space.
Oh.
So if they want to include trails or recreation components, for example, we will typically say, hey, that's not something that the city or Mile High would agree to or be responsible for. And so those situations are ones where the developer will say, well, we want to obligate the metro district to that because we want multiple purposes in there. So that's one example I can think of,
Okay.
or a couple of examples. But sometimes they do want the ongoing responsibilities.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Looks like item 5 moves forward then.
Yes.
You're welcome. 6, Strontia Springs, rather. Access Improvement Project Amendment, Matthew.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good morning. Standard, this is part of the Foothills Agreement with Denver Water. So the standard 82.2%, 15.3% is the split between the two entities. We own the 15.73%. Originally, the project, there were 2 phases for the project. Both projects impacted the budget because of some unknown conditions. The first phase, the original plan was called for a concrete foundation anchored into bedrock to support the mechanical stabilized for the MSE wall. Once the contractor started excavating, the bedrock was significantly deeper than anticipated. So there was the added cost of more excavation and hauling off the material. They also had to, which this required a redesign for both the concrete foundation and the MSE wall. Phase 2 was the removal of the improvised rail card. And for the folks that have been to Strontia, to the left side of the towers, there was an old rail card that they used as a bridge. They wanted to remove it and bring it up to date. Couple challenges there. Once they excavated, dug down, they discovered that they needed to abate for asbestos and lead paint. And then the original training wall or retaining wall was deemed unfeasible due to the geotechnical challenges because of the bedrock. So they essentially had to rescope the project and replace the rail car design with a new engineered bridge instead of a retaining wall type thing. And those are the 2 changes that are happening for the project. The original project cost in total was 2.4 million. It's increased to 2.8 million. Our original share was 380,699, and it's going to increase to 440,538, which is a total increase of 59,859 for our share of the project. I'm asking council if they're willing to move this forward to a council meeting.
We'll do a little bit of Murphy's Law in place there. Councilmember Bergan, any questions or concerns?
No, I'm
All
good
right.
to move it on.
Moving it on then.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Number 7, Sarah, Highline Canal Use and Maintenance IGA.
Okay, so the interesting thing about this item is that we are no longer asking for approval for this IGA. So this just happened yesterday. So this is a little bit like my driving, which is why Councilmember Bergan is laughing. No, so we are, so a little bit of history here. We've been working for the last couple of years on an easement or a license agreement with Denver Water for a segment of a new sewer line that would have been a cost-effective place for us to develop it in the Highline Canal. And
Not in the canal, but adjacent.
adjacent to in the canal corridor, that would have been, an even better idea, but no, just kidding. So so we were really close to getting a license agreement, and then that kind of stalled out. Meanwhile, we've had a contractor kind of building other segments of this, so we're kind of pushing this one till the end. We are then it kind of stalled out because Denver Water was transitioning the Highline Canal over to Arapahoe County. So then now we've been working with Arapahoe County on that easement or license agreement. We were moving towards an easement agreement, and they were in the process of developing all of their processes around dealing with now owning the Highline Canal. So this has taken quite a lot of time, but we have been trying to get this in the approval process because of the contractor we have on board, to just give some framework about timing. We were sent the easement agreements a couple of weeks ago, and there is an unwillingness to negotiate on easement agreement language. And we have therefore decided it is not in our best interest to put the sewer line in this location because the risk for the city is too big. So we have revisited our other alternatives. And though at the time, this was more cost effective, with all of the complexities that have been added to it with easement costs, additional requirements, and risk associated with this easement, the other alternative is actually now looking like a better long-term alternative for the city. So there's an update as to why we are asking to remove this item and we're no longer going to be pursuing this IGA. And again, I apologize for the timing, but those conversations just happened in the last few days to come to that decision. So we're not asking for anything, but if you have questions, we're happy to answer
This
those.
is update.
Yeah, it's an update.
Well, and there is still an ongoing negotiation between Arapahoe County and the Parks Department pros on what maintenance looks like for the trail recreational components of the Highline Canal. So there are still some things that would move forward, but this IGA had the key component of the sewer line in the corridor that's been removed. So what would come forward in the future would not include any kind of sewer line, but it would, the negotiations, right, are continuing for what maintenance looks like in the future on the canal.
Yeah, which is actually, and thank you for bringing that up. By decoupling the sewer line kind of easement allows more time and negotiations for how that ultimately lands in terms of maintenance.
And which entity was difficult to deal with in this?
Multiple entities historically have been difficult.
Yeah, I think it's a little interesting because I think what's happening right now is Denver Water historically, I mean, they're the largest landowner in the state and they've got a pretty robust property management, property rights team, and they have historically been challenging to negotiate with. I think they now are helping kind of guide Arapahoe County on approaches associated with land acquisition. And so I think Arapahoe County might be getting their feet underneath them a little bit in terms of how to move forward with these types of arrangements.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any more further questions from anyone or comments?
No, good luck.
Number 8, E470 reclaimed wastewater agreement. John.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. So this is a new agreement based on an old agreement. So back in 2015, E470 came to us requesting a lease for augmentation supply for a gravel pit that they were in the process of filling in. So when you dig a gravel pit, it exposes groundwater and that evaporates, and that's a depletion to the river, so you have to replace that. We had that agreement and it expired here in September. And they're asking for a new agreement because they didn't get it filled in. And so there's still depletions that are occurring from that. Not really any different from any of the other water leases that we do, except that it's E470. So we need IGA and we have to come before you folks to do that. So it will bring in revenue, about $268,000 over the next 5 years. And we built in the ability to extend it on a year-to-year basis after that. So we don't have to, if they don't still get it filled in, then maybe we can extend it by letter. So,
Okay. If only we knew someone close to the E470.
I say, let's lease it.
Great. Any further questions, comments? Is that something we need to advance to a study session or?
yeah, I think we were asking that. Yes.
Okay.
Approve item and move forward to study session.
Excellent. That moves forward. Nina with Box Elder Creek Basin presentation.
Well, great. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're very excited to present on a recent planning study we have completed for the Box Elder Creek Basin. We have attained a lot of great information from this study, so looking forward to presenting our findings. So just to give a little bit of background information and to orient ourselves a little bit, the Box Elder Basin is located east of the I-70 E470 corridor area and spans from Quincy Avenue all the way up until 72nd Avenue. It's comprised of around 72 square miles. Currently, there is limited activity in the basin. However, we are expecting growth to increase within the coming decades. There are some developers out in the basin right now, mostly industrial, some commercial, and there's also a very limited amount of wet utility infrastructure, so water, wastewater, storm. So with that, we've been thinking, how do we best serve our customers in the near term and long term as development starts to pick up within this basin?
That's some long-term planning, by the way.
It is, but we're proactive. So the first thing we needed to determine was what our potable water demands and what our wastewater flow rates would be. We were able to estimate the residential and employee population in the basin by considering what our current planning area boundary is and what it could potentially expand to over the course of these many decades. The blue line that you see in the figure is our current planning area boundary, and the yellow area shows potential annexations that could occur within the basin in the city. So this study looked at both those different scenarios, those different planning scenarios. We then used these projections to determine preliminary planning level water and wastewater pipe networks and sizes over the course of these many decades. So we were very interested in what a permanent solution could be in terms of conveying our wastewater needs. So we determined two main options. The first option could be to implement a permanent water reclamation facility or a treatment plant, or to utilize a permanent lift station that would pump wastewater flows from the basin up to Metro's northern treatment plant. Now, regardless of whichever alternative is chosen, at the end of the day, the location of either the lift station or the treatment plant will be the same simply due to topography. As you can see in the figure on the right, that is a projection of what growth could look like within the basin, and it will be picking up. So phasing will be very, very important to provide service as development starts to increase within the basin. So now that we've talked about the future, let's come back to the present and think about what some interim solutions could be. So overall, the goal of an interim solution is to manage wastewater flows in the near term and to ultimately defer high dollar projects and long pipeline construction that will only serve really a few developments within the near term. As part of the interim solution, we recommend developments to utilize interim packaged water reclamation facilities or individual sewage disposal systems, say that 10 times fast, and also known as septic systems. One thing to note with the interim solution is that these systems will require coordination with Metro Water Recovery. And that will be done through a format called a mini exclusion agreement, which I will discuss in the next slide. So according to our service contract with Metro, Metro does not allow for Aurora to have competing wastewater treatment abilities, except under certain instances. In this case, the challenges with this basin is the perfect instance, simply due to the remote location and due to the lack of wet utility infrastructure. In fact, Metro has actually approved a mini exclusion agreement that allows for wastewater treatment within the basin for certain developers. And as we grow with developers and others, it's expected that the number of these mini exclusion agreements will increase over the coming years. So with all the challenges of meeting our customer needs comes the discussion of fees. As part of Aurora Water's fee schedule, we do collect a Metro Water Recovery fee component. Typically, these fees are paid to Metro for wastewater services. In the case of this basin and its challenges, we would either, like I mentioned earlier, would make a connection to Metro's infrastructure via the Northern Treatment Plant, or we would use the collected Metro fees and fund a in-basin treatment facility. Either way, the fees would be held until we came to a final consensus on a permanent solution. So with that, growth is occurring quickly within the basin and the city as a whole. We are evaluating interim and long-term solutions, and we are in communication with Metro Recovery, and we are expecting more mini exclusion agreements to come.
Nice job, Nina. Information only?
Yes.
Excellent. Wow, that is some planning. I'm impressed.
Otherwise, things don't work when we get there.
Right. We've been under.
Plan the work the plan. Okay, excellent. Any questions, Councilor? Yes.
Yes, I have a couple. You said they don't allow for competing wastewater facilities, although they have these exclusion agreements. Why, is that a state? How did they, how are they able to not allow competing wastewater facilities?
Yeah, so they were created by state statute, but and then established in agreement with their member service areas, which Aurora is one, these agreements. And in the agreements, so they have the authority to operate as a independent quasi-governmental entity. And then we agreed that we would provide our flows, our wastewater flows to them, because it was in our best interest, more cost-effective, economies of scale. But for them to be effective, also, they needed to be able to plan on what flows would come to them. So we mutually agreed that we would not send our flows, we would not create competing systems that did not meet the criteria that was just discussed. So we then, by default, they can assume certain volumes of flows are going to them to build capacity in the treatment facilities, et cetera. And we can assume that we will have treatment capacities. But then with these remote locations like the Box Elder Basin, they kind of, in their planning, I guess I would say put a pin in it and recognize they had not built capacity for that. And we put a note in our planning to recognize that we don't have infrastructure or treatment capacity for the flow to go anywhere. So then we end up in a discussion with Metro on how do we cooperatively address those circumstances. But so probably more than you wanted in your question.
Okay, so, and then in terms of new development, they pay for it with either the connection fees and then just regular stormwater fees, or not stormwater, wastewater.
Wastewater, it gets a little complicated for developers in that if they want to get out ahead of the large regional infrastructure, they have to pay to create these little small systems, and they have to pay fees. So in
Okay.
some ways, they end up kind of paying twice for the management of their wastewater. Or their other choice is to wait until the regional solution
Happens, yeah.
there, and then they don't have to create the mini systems. But Port, Colorado is an example where they chose that they felt they needed to, and it was in their best interest to get out in front of the regional solution. So they created local solutions and have to pay fees. So it is a little bit interesting for developers who get out in front.
So for Port Colorado, did they build a lift station? I mean, is that
Yeah,
allowed?
They actually, they built a mini package treatment plant, basically.
Oh, okay.
But that is the other option potentially, are lift stations. If you're close enough to the boundary to, and there is capacity downstream and infrastructure in the other basin, then a lift station is an option. But we want to be careful with that because the infrastructure that has been designed and constructed in the basins that are to the west haven't been accounting for that flow. So we also don't want to put ourselves in a situation where we are having to upsize the other infrastructure basins infrastructure in order to support that short-term benefit, the kind of that short-term need. Porteos is actually another example. 12 years ago, they actually entered into a mini exclusion agreement and then had an ISDS that was approved by Metro until the infrastructure got out there. So it's kind of how it happens when people are building pretty far away from the system.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Is Metro pretty easy to deal with, responsive and?
Metro's very cooperative, and easy to deal with, I would say. One of the challenges that we both have, though, is when these governing documents and agreements were put in place decades ago, they couldn't at the time fully envision what the possibilities might be. So there are some limitations that we get to sort through, and they're very, very responsive and cooperative and collaborative, but have to operate within the framework of the authorities and agreements. And so we have talked a little bit about with them the need to revise some of those documents to catch up kind of with where we are.
Gotcha.
Is that accurate?
Yeah, and the main component of that is the reuse and the water recapture, right? That's which has a lot of threads to it. So, but yeah, they're great. They really are. And but also limited with capacity in terms of what they can tackle all at the same time. So, yeah.
Great, thank you. Sarah has taken on a small side project called Wild Horse Rescue. Yeah, it's just a little hobby.
Lucky
You've
for
got some
me.
other contracts and amendments.
Yeah, and this is just an FYI. So one of the things is I've been understanding more about not only the permitting process, but all of the different aspects that are the great work that's been done so far. There are a lot of different contracts that we have in place and a lot of different consultant and construction and design teams. And because of the evolution of the project and the permitting process, I do anticipate a number of amendments to those contracts. And so it felt very appropriate to come and kind of lay those out and just give you guys a heads up that, you know, I know that the procurement processes have just changed, but these amendments are specific to because of the kind of the nature and the duration of this project. So there's a list of them in the commentary, and I'd be happy to talk through. There's a dozen of them, but more, it's just a little bit of a heads up. And we'll touch on a couple of them. So the Tetra Tech, our design team and our permitting support team will be moving into additional 60, 90, 100% design. As permitting evolves in the EIS time, those will also be changing. There's a list of others in there. I'm happy again to talk through any of them, but I thought it was appropriate to just give you a heads up that we will be anticipating change orders just throughout the evolution of the project. So,
Makes sense.
yeah. So I don't know if there are any questions about that or any of the EAS process right now, but happy to answer.
Any questions, Councilmember Bergan?
No, thank you.
You feeling like the needle's moving a little bit on how things?
I feel like I am getting a better idea of what will be clear expectations to set in terms of timing. I mean, I think the team has done a phenomenal job. And I know Alex has mentioned a number of times there's only so much that we can control. What we are trying to do is, and that's part of what this list indicates, is there's so much work to be done to prepare for the EIS that we're trying to resource it appropriately to be able to keep a ton of things moving simultaneously in order to actually kick off the formal EIS process, which will take a couple of years. We have an optimistic schedule now in terms of hoping that that 2-year process kicks off by the end of next year. And that is if big things don't get thrown in our way, like, hey, you need to do a water quality model of the entire South Platte River, which would take 2 years to develop, right? So trying to make sure that we're in a space that we're preparing what is a defensible permitting process, because the other thing we don't want to do is at the end of the day go through multi-years of litigation. So it's important to do this upfront work to try to kind of minimize the overall time frame. But it's a monster. It is, I've never experienced anything quite like it. And it is, so we're doing everything we can to try to keep expectations in a reasonable place, keep people on the front end of the conversation so that we don't have delays on the back end of the conversation, and just make sure we have a defensible project at the end of the day.
I see.
So that didn't answer your question.
The NEPA is at the NEPA,
That's okay. What's that, Councilmember Bergan?
the NEPA then is at the end.
Yeah, so basically what we're in the process of doing right now is what's different now than how it used to be is an agency, a federal agency that you're working with in NEPA, they would give you this notice of intent to basically kick off the NEPA process. What happened is the new legislation that came through said that kickoff of that process needs to be completed in 2 years.
Oh, right.
Now, when you're talking about a water project where you have to evaluate everything from water quality to stream flow to the impacts on other agencies to climate change, all of those things, that 2-year window is actually pretty narrow because it includes public scoping. It includes a bunch of other processes. So what's happening right now is we're basically developing the draft document that is the kickoff, or that kind of starts that formal EIS process in coordination with the BLM and their contractors, again, to make sure that we've got a very robust, defensible document for the actual process to try to avoid that process going even longer. So that ideally, if we have the opportunity to, we have a favorable decision at the end of this with the Bureau of Reclamation, we can start putting shovels in the ground immediately. So there's, so yeah, it's an evolved, complex process, but I'm really excited about the team that we've got, both kind of with the BLM and the third party that they've hired, well, that we've hired on their behalf, as well as all of our consultants, to make sure that we're putting together what is appropriate so that it can truly move forward. So.
And then as far as trying to advocate to our congressional delegation to possibly have more flexibility in that 2-year, I guess we're pursuing that as well.
So we haven't pursued that. Honestly, the 2-year process for this type of project sounds like a long time, but it's really not. The 2-year, so keep in mind, the NEPA process is applied to these types of very complex water projects in the West, and things like a bridge project over, for a minor. So there's all kinds of different ways that the NEPA is being applied. in most instances, that 2 years is, there may be some flexibility in terms of what you can fit within that 2-year period of time. That 2 years includes a public scoping process where they provide kind of feedback on what should be included in the EIS document. It includes all of the review and approval of the federal agencies within that 2 years, and then a public comment process that then you have to respond to all those public comments for what is a massively complex analysis for not only alternatives, but also for our goals to prove that those are necessary, as well as all of the different resources of which there's about 20 that we're evaluating, everything from farmland to, again, to water quality to cultural resources. So it's just such a, so 2 years, again, it sounds like a long time. It just really isn't. So what we are pushing for is trying very hard to get to that 2-year kickoff timeframe.
Right.
And that's over this next year, what we'll be working very hard to do.
So, there's there might be a new Department of Government Efficiency. Maybe they would cut some red tape for you guys.
We've been a little curious about what the change in legislation is going to mean for this process. Currently, we're trying to keep it moving forward, but it's been on our mind for sure.
Yeah, so I'm calling it the pre-NEPA process, and we have gone back and forth on should we engage congressional delegations to try to speed up the pre-NEPA process. We've decided we think that might be counterproductive at this point. The BLM has been pretty responsive. They are trying to figure out ways, it appears, to help us deliver the project. And they have a lot of outside pressures that they get to manage, like NGOs that show up, for example. So we think right now it's in our best interest to continue to try to work as cooperatively as possible at the staff level, while preserving the option, if we think needed, to engage the delegation or representatives there. So that's kind of the approach we're taking. The other thing we're struggling with a little bit, kind of going back to the dial analogy, I kind of view now the Wild Horse Project as a Geiger counter dial. It just is bound a lot of movement within a little space. And one thing we'll need your help with is how to keep you and council, the rest of council, informed appropriately of the progress of the milestones. It probably doesn't make sense to come, or maybe it does, but we don't think it makes sense to come update you on every little single detail, because there is a ton of things. And so we're juggling how often do we come and what milestones do we provide updates on. So let us know if you'd like to hear more or less. And
I think you could just do like some sort of flow chart, checklist, whatever, that shows the milestones that have to happen, and just at some, I don't know, whatever, quarterly or something.
Okay.
Yeah.
You don't have to present, you could just provide it.
In the
Okay.
updates. Yeah, we are
Yeah.
working on, so we kind of a high level permitting scheduling with kind of the major project drivers in terms of time frame. We have a scheduling meeting with the BLM on Monday to kind of walk through that and the kind of realistic timeframes that we've been putting together. I can see a version of that that's kind of a truncated version of the permit and then approval and then construction schedule. And then maybe what we can do is, if anything changes from that based on any other things that are thrown out there, we can circle back around and talk about that changing and why. So we'll have more information by the end of next week that I think might be a good framework for that.
It would be good to track, as you're going along, what obstacle you hit, or what bump in the road happened, just for historical.
No, yeah, it is. It is.
the big ones,
Yes,
ethnographic.
ethnographic
Yeah.
survey is
You'll
one
see
of
that
them.
show up.
Yeah. Yeah, and what Marshall's talking about there is kind of a cultural evaluation it will take next year in conjunction with the timing that is required, honestly, for stream flow analysis, which, as you can imagine, is kind of the biggest hot topic, right? I mean, there's so many people that are concerned about the amount of water in the river and the impact that we're going to have, that the analysis is very complex and has to be very defensible. So both of those things are big focuses this next year. Yeah. So yeah, happy to put something together, then you guys can kind of monitor and see what you think.
And when it's all said and done, Sarah will become a professor of project management at DU, I think.
Well, yeah, I mean, so far the answer would be no, I'd get fired, right? I just told you that it's going to be delayed without saying that it's going to be delayed.
Thanks for the undertaking.
Sure.
And if you haven't eaten at the Greg Baker picnic structure up there, you need to. It's nicely designed and well built.
I'll just rent that out as an event center.
Yeah. With a water overlook one of these days.
Councilmember Sundberg,
Yeah.
I have an answer for
Oh, please,
Councilmember
yes.
Bergan on your question about the ASO flights. So we're looking at 5 to 6 areas. We have the Eagle, which I'm not sure if it's going to be split into the upper and lower Eagle. We have the Roaring Fork, upper and lower Roaring Fork, and then the upper South Platte, upper and lower of the upper South Platte flights. For the Roaring Fork rivers and the South Platte River, those baseline flights were flown in 2023. There's only one baseline flight that's flown. It's usually done in the early fall when the leaves are they try to time it to minimize leaf cover, but before the snow. And so those baseline flights have already been flown. So the snowstorm from a week and a half ago will not impact the data or the readings that we get. And then the flights to determine the snowpack are done in February and in April, and trying to maximize, the amount of snow available to look at.
Thank you.
Excellent. I'm very impressed. Like, bam, she gets me an answer within the same meeting.
Nice job. Nice job.
The magic of instant communication.
Do you have any miscellaneous matters for consideration, Councilman Bergan?
I do not.
Again, we have to give credit to Greg Baker and his retirement coming up. And thanks for all you've done, Greg. And even before I was on council, you were a resource for me from Leadership Aurora. Yeah, so thanks for your service and all you've done.
Thank you for everything you and Councilmember Bergan do. I really appreciate your commitment to the city. Congratulations to the city, so I do appreciate it.
Greg, I know you're going to miss me.
I'll hunt you down. That's in the recording, so.
Thanks, Greg. And do we even have a meeting in December?
I did
Not.
for the 18th, however, we have no items going, so we can cancel it.
Is that right? Councilwoman Bergan has a lot of baking to do, so.
There's nothing on the agenda, so.
Okay.
It's
I think we can skip it. Anybody else, unless there's a pressing meeting?
No, that's less meetings is more.
I think we should have a meeting so we can eat whatever it is you're baking.
Yeah.
He's wrong. I don't bake, but I got to do some shopping.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. This meeting is adjourned.